listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a non-judgmental infidelity coach. If you are engaging in anything you think counts as infidelity, I can help you deal with your feelings, clarify what you want, and make decisions about what you're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. When you are ready to resolve your infidelity situation in a way that's truly right for you, I can help you do it. There are two ways we can work together. We can work together one-on-one via Zoom, or you can purchase my self-guided course called You're Not the Only One. To get started with either of these options, go to the services page of my website, mariemurphyphd.com/services. Okay, it might not surprise you at all to hear that some of my clients ask me, how do I know if I'm just having a midlife crisis? And what they mean usually is, how do I know if my infidelity situation is just a manifestation or a symptom of a midlife crisis? You may have asked yourself this very question too. So today we're going to take a look at this question of how do I know if my infidelity situation is just a function of a midlife crisis? And to do that, we're going to start off by asking, what exactly is a midlife crisis? And in order to properly deal with that question, we ought to also consider the question of what exactly is midlife, or when exactly is someone within the middle of their lives? And although I realize that many people have explored these questions and answered them in different ways, I want to suggest that we don't actually know when we're in midlife because we don't know how long we're going to live, or at least a lot of us don't know how long we're going to live. Maybe some of us do, but a lot of us don't. I think we tend to think of midlife as something that happens in our 40s or even in our 50s, but statistically speaking, the latter half of our 40s is pushing the notion of being in midlife. For some of us, and for most of us, we've passed midlife by the time we hit our 50s. So this very notion that midlife is a thing that can be pinned down or is a definite phase of our lives that's associated with being in a certain age range is kind of questionable. Now, I'm not saying all of this to be overly pedantic, I promise. Rather, I'm saying all of this in the interest of destabilizing some of our ideas about what a midlife crisis is, or what it means to have one, or what we should do if we think we are having one. And for reasons which I will attempt to make clear as I continue through today's episode, I think that destabilizing the idea that midlife necessarily pertains to certain ages or age ranges is important. And I think it's really important to remember that we may not have any idea of knowing when we ourselves are in the middle of our lives. So, back to the question of what exactly a midlife crisis is. I know good and gosh darn well that there are people who have attempted to define exactly what a midlife crisis is. And with all due respect for people who have made conceptualizing midlife crises their life's work, I have to say that a lot of the discussions of midlife crises that I have encountered have been full of holes. Holes in their thinking, holes in their reasoning, holes in their logic, holes in the generalizations they make. So, to that effect, rather than tell you how a bunch of experts or so-called experts have defined a midlife crisis, I'm going to tell you what I have observed, what people tend to think a midlife crisis is, more or less, right? So my observation is that the way that some people think about a midlife crisis is that it's a thing that happens when someone who has lived for a few decades or maybe several decades is no longer satisfied with their life as it is, and demonstrates this dissatisfaction by doing things that are different or perhaps very different from what they've been doing, right? And my observation is that sometimes, not always, but often enough, people assume that this is a problem. My observation is that some people think it's unreasonable for someone to wake up one morning and decide that they're dissatisfied with their lives, especially if that person's life seems pretty good, quote unquote good, by conventional understandings of what a good life should look like. Furthermore, my observation is that if someone who has a seemingly quote unquote good life, that person's dissatisfaction with their life should be considered a passing phase or a temporary episode. Or what I mean by that is that the thinking goes that if someone who has a seemingly good life is dissatisfied with their life, it must be a passing phase or a temporary episode. I'm not saying that we ought to think that way. I'm saying that people think that we should think that way, right? The thinking goes that if someone who has a quote unquote good life is freaking out because they're dissatisfied with their life, they'll eventually come to their senses and see that actually their life is pretty great. And the crisis will be resolved by the person who is having the crisis going back to business as usual. I'm willing to bet that you recognize this kind of thinking. What I've just described may not be the only way people think about what a midlife crisis is or how it's supposed to be resolved, but it's certainly not an uncommon way of thinking about these things, right? The problem, of course, is that there are a number of issues with this way of thinking about what we might call a midlife crisis. And the first is that this way of thinking that I just outlined is that it dismisses the legitimacy of the crisis, or it dismisses the legitimacy of the dissatisfaction underlying the crisis. A lot of us tend to think that if our life looks a certain way, or if our life contains certain things, we have no right to be dissatisfied and want something different. Or we may think this of other people. We may think that if other people's lives have certain features or certain attributes, they have no right to be dissatisfied with their lives, and they have no right to want to live differently. Plenty of clients have come to me and said something very close to, well, I don't feel like I have any right to be cheating. I'm married and my spouse is a great person, a great parent, and a great provider. We have a really good life together. We have money. We have a nice home. We do fun stuff together. We have good relationships with our friends and our family and our community. We have great kids, and we have all the things that anyone could ever want. But I'm still totally unsatisfied, and I don't think it's okay for me to be unsatisfied with what I have. And this is often where people start to use the S word. And by the S word, I mean selfish. So this brings me to the second problem that I want to highlight. What if you don't have to be satisfied with all the things that quote unquote everyone thinks you should be satisfied with? What if it's okay to want something other than what you currently have? Now, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with valuing what you already have. Of course not. It's wonderful to appreciate what you currently have. It's wonderful to recognize the wonderful things in your life. Having a partner who's a great person, having money, having great kids, having a great home, having great relationships with family and friends. These are all wonderful things to appreciate and value. Even if you appreciate and value those things, are you allowed to want something different? A lot of the time, we think that we can't or shouldn't or ought not to. A lot of times we think that if we have it pretty good, we shouldn't possibly want anything more or anything other than what we currently have. And interestingly enough, sometimes we think it shouldn't even be possible for us to want anything other than what we already have. And I think there are a lot of reasons why people buy into this kind of thinking. I think there are a lot of reasons why people subscribe to the idea that if we have it pretty good, we should be satisfied with what we have, and that should be enough for us, and we shouldn't want anything else. And although all of these reasons might make for an interesting discussion another time, the point I want to make today is that maybe we don't have to be satisfied with the things that everyone thinks we should be satisfied with. We don't even have to be satisfied with the things that we thought we were going to be satisfied with. We don't have to be eternally satisfied with the things that we were once satisfied with. I want to suggest you consider the possibility that it is okay to grow and change and evolve and to want different things over the course of your lifetime. Now, I know that a lot of you listening will quickly want to protest and say, no, it isn't, for at least a dozen different reasons. Let's park all of the reasons why you think it isn't okay to want different things over the course of your lifetime for just a second here. Let's consider the possibility that those reasons might not need any more of your attention right now. You can always come back to them later if you want to. And let's just consider that maybe, just maybe, it might be okay to want different things over the course of your lifetime. Now, the third problem with the way of thinking about midlife crises that I described however many minutes back is that it presumes that the solution to the so-called problem of the crisis is to come back to your senses and go back to business as usual. You have a great life. How could you possibly or legitimately want anything other than what you already have? Obviously, the solution to your crisis is to appreciate how good you have it and get back on the horse. That's how the thinking sometimes goes. But what if the solution to the quote-unquote problem of having a midlife crisis is not to go back to business as usual? At least, not necessarily. Rather, what if the solution to having a midlife crisis is to ruthlessly and lovingly evaluate your life and what you want out of your one wild and precious life, and to make some decisions about how you want to move forward that are not dictated by what everyone thinks you should want or by what you think you should want? By the way, that wild and precious life line is indeed from a Mary Oliver poem, and it is also a reference to a past episode of this podcast. If you think that you are having anything along the lines of a midlife crisis, go and listen to episode 144, Your One Wild and Precious Life. Even if you aren't having anything along the lines of what could be considered a midlife crisis, you might want to listen to that episode if you haven't yet. What if waking up one morning and deciding that you are dissatisfied with all of your life or a major aspect of your life or a few major aspects of your life is actually a wonderful opportunity to reexamine what you want and what you want to do about what you want? And what if deciding that you want to make some major changes in your life doesn't have to be a problem? Now, again, this is where a lot of people want to protest, especially, but not exclusively, people who are married and have kids. A lot of folks I work with who have a spouse and kids and who are engaging in infidelity love to say things like, but if I take a major left turn in my life, that will destroy the lives of people I care about. Here's the thing. It may seem like an absolute truth that if you make any major changes in your life, such as, for instance, deciding to leave your marriage or your committed relationship, that you will literally destroy other people's lives in the process. But that is not an absolute truth. It really isn't. Now, how exactly to navigate leaving a committed relationship, especially when there are kids involved, is a topic that is worthy of serious consideration, for sure. And that's another topic for another time. But the point for now is that making changes in your life that do impact other people does not mean that you are literally or figuratively going to destroy anyone else's lives. I spend a lot of time coaching people on this topic. So if you feel like you're having a hard time getting your head around this idea, that's totally okay. And this is something that we can talk about and work through with respect to the specifics of your individual situation. Anyway, the big problem that we want to be aware of here is that sometimes we are so sure that if we make a big change in our lives, it will destroy the lives of people we care about. And when we are sure this is true, we usually freak out because we don't want to destroy the lives of people we care about, which is reasonable enough. But when it seems to us like something we might do could literally destroy people's lives, what we often do is tell ourselves that we can't possibly even consider wanting the changes we think we might want. We tell ourselves instead that we have to keep things the way they are, so we might as well not even bother considering our other options. And this is how a lot of folks dig themselves into a deeper and deeper hole. If we pile thought error on top of thought error, we box ourselves into a pretty tight corner and we end up feeling terrible. And when we feel terrible, we may end up doing things that make our whole situation worse. What do I mean by a thought error? I mean thinking a thought is true that isn't true in any absolute sense and not questioning that thought. So thinking that you're going to destroy other people's lives if you leave your marriage is a thought error. Thinking that because we're going to destroy other people's lives, we can't even consider our options or changes that we might want to make is another thought error. Right? When we pile those on top of each other, we bury ourselves pretty darn deep underground. It's important to remember that giving yourself the opportunity to be radically honest with yourself about what you want in relation to your infidelity situation or in relation to any area of your life is something that you can do privately. Your thoughts are your own private business. Your mind is a private space in which you can consider anything you want. Being radically honest with yourself about what you want is not going to have any direct impact on anyone. You being honest with yourself about what you want is something you can do within the privacy of your own mind, and nobody else has to even know what's happening. And then, after having given yourself the chance to be ruthlessly honest with yourself about what you want, you can decide what you want to do about what you want. And if taking action in the service of what you want does seem like it's going to have an impact on other people, you can deal with that one step at a time. That's the only way we can deal with anything, one step at a time. Sometimes we are so terrified to give ourselves the opportunity to consider what we really want because we're afraid that if we do, the floodgates of change will open immediately and it will be sheer hell for us and those we love, and our world will literally or figuratively come to an end and will destroy the lives of people we care about. But that usually isn't quite how it works, right? Thinking about what you might like to change in your life is not going to lead to an instant disaster of any kind. So please consider that the solution to your midlife crisis or your possible midlife crisis type thing is not to attempt to convince yourself that because you have such a good life, there's something wrong with you for being dissatisfied with it, and you'd better solve the problem by convincing yourself to get back on board with business as usual. That may not work at all, and moreover, attempting to do this may backfire rather spectacularly. Now, I do want to mention that sometimes people decide they are very satisfied with some aspect of their life or all aspects of their lives, and they take a close look at this dissatisfaction, and they ultimately come to the conclusion that the dissatisfaction either wasn't about exactly what they thought it was about, or that they could resolve their dissatisfaction by making rather subtle changes in their lives. Maybe these subtle changes come from the way they're thinking about their lives. Maybe these subtle changes come in the form of making changes in their actual external circumstances. Usually it's a little bit of both. So it's important to be aware of that. Now, that might sound kind of abstract or vague, so let me see if I can make it a little more concrete. Sometimes people find themselves very dissatisfied in their lives and in their marriages, and they have an affair, and they think for a while that the solution to their problems is to leave their marriage and start a completely new kind of life, and to do that with their affair partner. Now, let me be clear about something. Sometimes people do exactly that, and it works out great for them. It's exactly what they want. And on the other hand, sometimes upon thinking things through very systematically and deliberately, people come to the conclusion that it isn't really their marriage that they're dissatisfied with. Or they come to the conclusion that they are dissatisfied with some aspects of their marriage, but they genuinely want to stay married to their spouse and make changes in their marriage. And they go about doing that, and that can work out great too. The reason why I say all of this is to attempt to make it abundantly clear that considering your dissatisfaction in your life or in your marriage or in whatever relationship you're in does not necessarily mean that you will choose to leave your marriage or choose to end your relationship or choose to make any other big changes in your life. Yes, considering your dissatisfaction might lead to those kinds of changes, but it also might not. And you simply won't know until you give yourself the chance to slow down and be radically honest with yourself about what you want and what you don't want at this stage of your life. Not what you wanted 10 years ago, not what you wanted 20 years ago, not what you wanted 30 years ago, not what you wanted 100 years ago, but what you want at this stage right now and what you want in the future. Now, I know how very scary it can be to be radically honest with yourself about what you want at this stage of your life, but being truthful with yourself will solve a lot of problems. To echo what I've been saying here, we tend to think that if we're honest with ourselves about what we want, bad things will happen. But when we're honest with ourselves about what we want, we can consciously decide what we want to do about what we want. And that gives us a lot more power than we have when we aren't honest with ourselves about what we want. After all, if we decide that we want something, we can always decide that we aren't going to pursue that something. We can always decide that we're going to learn how to live without the thing that we want. That's always an option. And exercising that option consciously is a lot more powerful than not allowing ourselves to acknowledge what we want in the first place. So, if you have been going along with business as usual, whatever that means in your life, and you're starting to think that business as usual just isn't going to work all that well for you anymore, here's what I want you to know. I'm not asking you to consider this anymore. I'm asking you to know this. You are allowed to want different things from what you have wanted in the past. You are allowed to want different things in your life, even if your life, by your own estimation, is quite good. You are allowed to make changes in the service of what you want. The solution to your crisis is not to try to convince yourself that you should just stick to the status quo and be happy because what you have should be good enough for you. Rather, the way out of your dissatisfaction and whatever crises may accompany that dissatisfaction is to rigorously examine what you want right now. Then you can decide what you want to do about that. Personally, I think it's great to have a so-called midlife crisis. I think it's great to wake up one morning and say, do I really want to keep doing this? Whatever this is. Sometimes we need a major moment of reckoning with our lives as a whole or with particular aspects of our lives, or maybe just one aspect of our life, in order to live authentically. And sometimes we really need to start living more authentically, or else we're going to run into some serious fucking trouble. What do I mean by serious fucking trouble? Well, I mean that when we aren't living authentically enough, we tend to do things that can have consequences that we really don't like. If we're miserable living in our nice big house and driving our nice fancy car and staying married to our lovely spouse who really is a wonderful person, if we're dissatisfied, we may slowly drink ourselves to death. Or we may become abjectly depressed and unable to function. Or we may grind our teeth down to nothing. Or we may develop a habit of killing kittens in back alleys. Or we may get a little reckless behind the wheel. Or we may handle our infidelity situation in a very careless way, and something that may happen that creates, or at least occasions, a whole lot of suffering for everyone involved. Or we may sink into such bitterness that we're deeply unpleasant to be around. We may stay married and stay in our lives and not destroy anyone's lives, quote unquote, by making changes. But what good does that do anyone if we're absolutely miserable to be in the presence of, right? I know that some folks out there consider living authentically, whatever that may mean, to be a frivolous thing or a luxury, or at the very least, a lower priority than all of the other important things in life. And I can understand why people think that to a great extent. But what I want to suggest is that living authentically and fulfilling your responsibilities in life do not have to be mutually exclusive. And I want to suggest that there's only a certain extent to which you can compromise your desire to live in a particular way before you start to compromise your ability to fulfill your responsibilities. Okay. I want to start to speak a little more specifically to the relationship between midlife crises and infidelity now. As I've talked about in other episodes, there's a common belief that marriage should last a lifetime. And a lot of us have really bought into the idea that if marriage doesn't last a lifetime, something has gone seriously wrong. In addition to that, interestingly enough, many people, not everyone of course, but many people experience marriage to be kind of a slog. Some people start off their marriages with great enthusiasm, but not everyone does. Some people get married because it's expected of them, or because they think it's expected of them, or because it seems like the reasonable thing to do at that stage of their lives. And for some people, there isn't a whole lot of joy even at the outset of a marriage. But whether there is or isn't, a lot of folks find themselves sliding into a marital relationship that is focused on things like getting things done, making money, having kids, getting jobs, paying the bills, buying the house, buying the bigger house, taking care of the aging parents. Or maybe it's like buying the yacht, buying the mansion, buying the private jet, or whatever. We all have different goals and different challenges. And whatever our goals and challenges are, a lot of people find that the primary focus of their marriage starts to become just getting the things done. And some people manage to find quite a lot of joy in that, but a lot of people don't. However, a lot of people do find ways of convincing themselves that their life is just fine, even though they're not feeling a whole lot of joy, and they feel like all they're doing, especially within the context of their marriage, is just getting the things done. And we convince ourselves that things are just fine, even when they aren't all that fine, for all sorts of reasons that are perfectly human and perfectly understandable. For one thing, there's so much social pressure to stay married if you've gotten married. And if your life looks pretty good by conventional standards or so-called conventional standards, people tend to think that you should be happy with what you have, and you yourself may think that you should be happy with what you have. That doesn't leave a whole lot of room for soul searching, right? Many of us have a lot to do every single day, right? We've got meals to cook and shoes to tie and butts to wipe and messes to clean up and work to do and money to make and what am I trying to say? Lawns to mow, that kind of thing, like plants to water, pets to feed, dogs to walk, etc. And just getting the basic life stuff done can take up a pretty good amount of time. You may not have much energy left over for soul searching, even if you theoretically want to give yourself room for soul searching. On top of that, the idea of acknowledging to yourself that you aren't really fine with the way your life is can be terrifying. So for all of these reasons and then some, many of us go many years telling ourselves that we're fine, everything's fine, it's all fine, the marriage is fine, because doing that seems like the best option we've got. Or sometimes it seems like the only option we've got. But then something happens, and telling ourselves that we're fine without actually giving ourselves a chance to be honest with ourselves about how the heck we're doing just does not work anymore. And of course, sometimes the thing that happens is we find ourselves having an affair or otherwise engaging in infidelity. And we may equate this with having a midlife crisis, or others may tell us that this is an indication that we are having a midlife crisis. And when I say others may tell us this may be like other people that we personally know, or it may just be voices on the internet that tell you this. Now, here's the thing. Some people will tell you that if this kind of thing has happened for you, if you've been in a marriage that has been primarily oriented to working with your spouse to get the basic things in life taken care of, and you've been living this way for a while and you are having an affair, the obvious solution is to try and work on your marriage. And of course, some folks go even further and tell you that the only solution to this kind of a situation is to go back and work on your marriage. End your affair, work on your marriage, everything will be fine. Now, other folks will acknowledge that sometimes when we've been focused on the daily grind for years or decades, we've probably gotten into the habit of neglecting ourselves as individuals. We may have successfully fulfilled our relationships as a parent or as a provider, or as a partner, or as a worker, or as a family member, or all of those things and then some, but what's gotten lost along the way is our individuality, right? Therefore, some folks will tell you if you're unhappy in your marriage and you've been having an affair, the solution to the problem is to get yourself a new hobby, or to start taking more time for yourself, or to find something that you are really excited about and to do more of that. Here's the thing. It might indeed be the case that your marriage has been neglected for a long time, and it also might be the case that your sense of yourself as an individual has been pretty neglected for a long time too. And it may be the case that the neglect of your marriage and the neglect of yourself as an individual has been hard for you to recognize and do anything about. And it is certainly possible that if you were to start engaging in your marriage in a different way and start nurturing your relationship with yourself in a different way, you will be able to find great satisfaction within your life as a whole and within your marriage more specifically. It is possible that this would provide a satisfying resolution to your midlife crisis / infidelity situation thing. But the problem I have with these sorts of prescriptions, meaning the whole idea that if you're having an affair and you're dissatisfied in your life, the solution is to reinvest in your marriage and get yourself a hobby and everything will be fine way of thinking, is that this line of thinking delegitimizes the possibility that you really don't like the way things are in your life or in your marriage and that you actually want to change these things, right? Is it possible that your dissatisfaction could be resolved by reinvesting in your marriage and getting yourself a hobby and carving out a bit more you time for you to be an individual? Sure, it's possible. But what I really want to stress is that this does not have to be the solution. And it isn't the solution for everyone. The solution to your dissatisfaction might be to make some bigger life changes. You might want to leave your marriage. You might want to make some other big changes in your life. And it's legitimate to want to leave your marriage. It's legitimate to leave your marriage. It's legitimate to make other big changes in your life too. But so often we aren't told that making these kinds of changes is a legitimate option. On a similar note, there's an idea out there that infidelity happens when we've been stuck in a rut for a long time, And we want to break out of that rut and become a different version of ourselves, or explore different parts of ourselves, or have different kinds of experiences in life, right? And sometimes people call this a midlife crisis. Sometimes they don't, but we could consider it kind of midlife crisis-ish or esque, right? Now, this may indeed be part of what's going on within your infidelity situation, right? You may find that your infidelity situation offers you the opportunity to become a different version of yourself. Your infidelity situation may offer you the opportunity to have different kinds of experiences. Your infidelity situation may offer you the opportunity to get out of a rut you've been stuck in, or multiple ruts you've been stuck in. That may be true. But again, here's the problem. So often, the proposed solution to this version of the problem, or this framing of the problem, is to explore different parts of yourself within your marriage, or to create different experiences within your marriage, or to get out of the ruts within your marriage. And again, that might work really well for you. That approach could provide a very satisfying resolution to your frustrations and challenges and dissatisfactions. But it also might not, and it definitely doesn't have to. You might want to become a different version of yourself within the context of your marriage, but you also might want to become a different version of yourself outside of the context of your marriage. And that is a fair thing to want. Some of the louder voices within the conversations about infidelity suggest that if you're engaging in infidelity, it's just an indication that you need to do a better job of relating to your spouse or to your committed partner. Although I think that can be a fair characterization of some people's experiences with infidelity, I do not think that this is a fair characterization of everyone's experiences. And for that reason, I think that pushing this kind of perspective does a lot of people a great disservice. Many people, including a lot of relationship expert type people, operate from the premise that if someone thinks they don't want to stay in a relationship they committed to, they must be confused, or they must be experiencing a temporary crisis. And there's definitely an idea out there that if you're engaging in infidelity and you're thinking you might want to leave your committed relationship, then you're definitely and obviously having a midlife crisis. And the appropriate solution is to come back to your senses and recognize that really the best way to live your life is to stay in your marriage till death do you and your spouse part. And what I see happening is that people start to believe that this idea about how one should live is not just an idea that some people have, but rather is the truth of what is best for everyone, unequivocally best for everyone. And what happens then is people come up with reasons to doubt what they want. And often, before they start working with me anyway, they lack the tools to deal with their doubts in a critical way. And that can lead to a lot of unnecessary suffering. More specifically, or here's a specific example, questioning what you want when you think that the best way to resolve an infidelity situation / midlife crisis to go back to your marriage and recommit to your spouse is that a lot of people subject their relationship with their affair partner, or their desire for a non-affair relationship with their affair partner, to an intense and perhaps excessive degree of scrutiny. That was kind of a mouthful. Let me see if I can say that again, and hopefully it will be clear. Fingers crossed. Let's see how it goes. What I'm getting at is that when people assume or have kind of like absorbed the idea that the way to resolve an infidelity situation is obviously to go back to your marriage and recommit to your spouse and get a hobby and find enough you time, is that when people think that that is like the truth, they may minimize or invalidate their desire for a relationship with their affair partner. They may subject their relationship with their affair partner to an excessive degree of scrutiny, right? If the obvious standard is to stay with your spouse, then it makes it really hard to consider your desire to have a relationship with your affair partner in an above-board way. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that you don't want to carefully evaluate your relationship with your affair partner before you make decisions about how you resolve your infidelity situation. Of course, you want to think carefully about your relationship with your affair partner as you go about making choices. What I'm talking about is different from carefully considering what you want. What I see a lot of people doing is saying, well, if it's fundamentally better for me to stay married than to leave my marriage and pursue a relationship with my affair partner, then my relationship with my affair partner better be perfect in order for me to dare to consider leaving my marriage to pursue it. People, perfection is a pretty high bar to set for any relationship. If your relationship with your affair partner has to be perfect, whatever that might mean, in order for you to see it as a legitimate relationship that's worthy of pursuing, rather than viewing it as a symptom of a midlife crisis freakout and nothing more, then your fate is probably sealed. And you might not want to do that to yourself. Rather, I encourage you to consider that your affair relationship might be something that you really want to pursue. Might. And I encourage you to consider that that's a legitimate thing to want to pursue. If you're going to consider the possibility that your affair relationship is quote unquote just a manifestation of a midlife crisis, then at least give equal consideration to the possibility that it isn't that. If you're considering that maybe the best thing for you to do is just stay married and end your affair because everyone says that's what you're supposed to do, at least give equal consideration to the possibility that maybe it's okay to do something other than that. If you're considering the possibility that maybe your affair relationship has to be perfect in order for you to consider making big changes in your life in order to pursue a non-affair relationship with your current affair partner, at least consider the possibility that by setting the bar that high, you may be cutting yourself off from wonderful experiences. Finally, again, I want to reiterate that you have the right to change and evolve and grow. At least consider the possibility that you have the right to change and evolve and grow. Consider the possibility that you have the right to shapeshift as you go through life. Yes, shapeshifting may involve extricating yourself from commitments you've made, but it is possible to do that and to do it with care and respect for those who may be impacted by your choices. Consider the possibility that it isn't a crime to want something different from what you wanted at one point in your life. And consider the possibility that if it takes a crisis of some sort, a quote-unquote midlife crisis or any other kind of crisis, to evolve into the fullest expression of who you are, that might be a crisis well worth having. All right, everybody, that is it for today. If you want my help resolving your infidelity situation in a way that's truly right for you, let's get to work. Head on over to the services page of my website, mariemurphyphd.com/services, to either book an introductory coaching session with me, which is the way to start working with me one-on-one, or to purchase my self-guided course, You're Not the Only One. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great week or two. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.